Dear students, welcome to this teleconferencing session pertaining to voluntary action in rural development. As you are aware, that master's program in rural development has 9 courses where a learner is supposed to study print materials and take term and examinations at the end of each year. This spread is like this, that in the beginning, first semester, if you think in semester terms, 3 courses are offered. In the next, then research methodology and methods in social research courses offered, and the students are supposed to work on their project work. And in the next year, you have a choice out of 6 courses to do any 5 courses. Voluntary action in rural development is one of the courses where it's one of the important courses where areas related to voluntary organizations and NGOs are covered, and it's vital in the sense since most rural development efforts which have been in vogue since independence and even earlier, particularly after independence, had been made by the Indian state. Gradually, this people's initiatives also came into picture, and a large number of voluntary organizations and NGOs emerged which engaged themselves in the process of rural development. That's why this course is quite important in that sense. And 2 more, the student is supposed to do research work and prepare a project report, which is equivalent to 2 courses, that's equal to 12 credits. That is a, additional. So in a sense, it's 9 courses where print material student is to study and take term and examination. But for the project work, student has to conduct research and prepare a project proposal in consultation with the supervisor or guide allotted to him by the study center, and then go to the field, collect data, analyze data, and then ultimately presentation of data and preparation of project report, which has to be submitted to the S&E division. It's equivalent to 12 credits, that's equal to 2 6-credit courses. So in a sense, the whole in this sense, the whole program is worth 66 credits. Like as I have said that in the second year, students are supposed to choose out of 6 courses, 5 courses, which is one is related to social development, and another course is related to this rural health care, and then we have communication and extension. Then we have these courses like land reforms and rural development, and then entrepreneurship and rural development, and voluntary action in rural development. Now when we come to voluntary action in rural development, this particularly 2 sessions we will be devoting to it. In earlier session somewhere we have also, if we recall back all that, we have try to explain what are the fundamentals of voluntary action, like it's a collective or community action that springs from people's own will or volition, and it is rooted in the community. Because as I said that since independence, most rural development efforts particularly were conceived through a planned, process of planning, 5-year plans by the state, Indian state. But on the way, as we proceeded further, onwards, and there was a realization that enough justice has not been done to develop the rural areas, and people from within the society area started making small efforts by making their own associations and attending to the problems prevalent in rural areas. This way the whole growth of voluntary sector came into picture, particularly after 1980s. This growth has has taken in a big way, and in fact, to begin with, no doubt state was apprehensive for the viewpoints propagated by the VOs and NGOs, but over a period Indian state also realized that their good work has been done, and alternative models of development have been proposed by these VOs and NGOs, and state recognized their work and in a way started co-opting and started learning from the experiences of the voluntary sector. This is a particular phenomena which is in fact has taken all over the world also. India being a democratic country, a liberal democracy, such conditions existed here and which has resulted ultimately to the growth of voluntary association. The fundamentals, as I said, these existed within the democratic society because people could start their own initiatives with their own volition and their own will. And today's teleconferencing session, I'll come around this how democratic institutions are a fertile, particularly liberal democracy, are a fertile ground for the growth of democratic societies. And to begin with, in the initial stages, it's better to recapitulate what we saw that to the little fundamentals of this. What is voluntarism after all? Why voluntary action in society? As I said, that it is if the conditions are such in a society where people can take their own initiative with their own free will, only then it's possible to make associations or to constitute associations where people can come together with their own free will and join to attend to a certain social problem or for a broader cause, and at will they can even move out of it. Such conditions historically have never existed. This is only basic. These conditions have existed only in liberal democracies. Basic conditions for voluntarism are then free and open society, where and level of development should be such of the society that individuals are able to donate free time and labor for the welfare of the community. Only then voluntary organization or voluntary action voluntary organizations can exist in society, or voluntary action can take place in a society. In societies where there is a, you can say absolute monarchy, or where there is a dictatorships, in such societies, scope for the existence of voluntary organizations gets minimized. I mean that's basically practically a possibility gets very reduced to the minimum. Voluntary action helps to promote, in fact, to mobilize their people, so whereby people can mobilize their own resources and can express their own potential, find solutions to their own problems and respond to the needs and aspirations of the community effectively. When a state plans and does something for the development, makes any development efforts, that is too far detached from the people's reality. Sometimes they conceive for various considerations, they may not conceive, or they may not have properly, they may not have the proper data, they may not have the ground, feel the pulse of the people at the ground realities or the requirements of the people at the grassroots level. And this way, their planning process in that sense sometimes misses the real import of development, and large number of funds go waste down the line from top to bottom. And this sort of approach, even in development otherwise, if you leave aside voluntary associations, also had historically in the recent history, or particularly since independence, has proved that a large number of unsuccessful efforts made by the state where a lot of wastage has occurred. And from those experiences, no doubt, a democratic state always learns and improves upon and makes more better efforts. So that process continues. But in this whole process also emerged, as I said, the voluntary sector, voluntary associations, which challenge the fundamentals of development of the Indian state and gave various kind of alternatives. There had been large number of successful experiences, and where people could, whether it's in watershed development, whether it's in development of rural areas in the field of education or health or other aspects, whether it's people like Anna Hazare who did or Telonia experience, these sort of experiments have occurred. A large number of people from where the state has learned its lessons and has tried to improve upon, rather to try to co-opt it. And no doubt, significantly, state created institutions like CAPART, where the funding for voluntary sector and NGOs was recognized almost by the second, third 5-year plan, and there was sufficient scope for the people to form association. It gave an encouragement. Beginning stages, there was state was apprehensive toward their contribution and was not so, in a way, was not giving due recognition to the contribution of the voluntary sector in development. But later on, as the voluntary sector proved made with its own efforts, sometimes even without the help of the state, or within those kind of help which is permissible to every village or any kind of society existing in society, only within those limits, not with any extra resources. Also, people like Anna Hazare never sought any extra sources either from industry or from the state, but they mobilize the people and their will, through their collective will, only made development, continued development work in rural areas, and proved successfully that they can succeed in such efforts. From there, the Indian state learned a lot. And so, the voluntary action helps people to mobilize their own sources. I said that they can, in that sense, they are able to express their own potential and attend to the needs, what are the real problems, ground level problems or grassroots problems. Voluntary action in practice tends to take the form of voluntary organizations. Now, theoretically, voluntarism is that whensoever people are willing, they can identify a problem, they can come together and disperse it after the problem is solved. But in practice, such a situation does not produce long-term results. So then people do remain structure a kind of organization. Once the word organization comes into picture, I mean, and that no doubt, the pure and theoretical meaning of voluntarism gets little lost, but because anything which is organized, anything which is takes the form of an organization, certainly will have to have some kind of structure, whether it's a kind of administrative structure, whether it's kind of, its own functional structure. So when this kind comes into picture, and it also becomes a little, a kind of what you can say, a formal in the sense, not an informal relation, then this sort of thing no doubt curbs philosophically and theoretically on the fundamentals of voluntarism, but that necessity ultimately emerges, because if you are thinking of a kind of attending to certain kind of problems in a long term, you need to formulate an organization. So once a voluntary organization comes into picture, then but the tenets underlying that remained, that formed with the freedom and choice of the people, and it's formed by the people interested in the welfare and development of community, and the membership is purely voluntary, non-profit making ventures governed by their own set of rules and regulations. Now, such a voluntary organization will make its own set of rules and regulations with the consent, with the discussion, with the democratic participation of all the people. Now, in this course, if you have, you might have received the materials, and in this course, if you go through, the contents are spread. Like, since I will take a little distraction from the main course to tell you that when I said that when organization comes into picture, different kind of dilution in the principle of voluntarism comes up. So the whole content structure, if you visualize in this courses, if you have gone through, and in the unit 1 we have discussed voluntarism, theoretical issues. Here we have discussed the pure theoretical, philosophical foundations of voluntarism, on which this very concept has emerged, and why this exists in society, why there is the need for it, what is the philosophical basis of it, how through philosophy it has emerged, and we have tried to link it to the then social theories, particularly Max Weber's theory of social action, because once from pure philosophy, from an idea, you transcend to practicality and link with the functioning in society. Then we come to sociology. There we have particularly tried to explain in the first unit the linkages of its philosophical foundations with the Parsons voluntaristic theory of Parsons, Talcott Parsons, a very renowned American sociologist who conceived this voluntaristic theory of social action. We have discussed that. And the second one, there are Max Weber. Max Weber's social action also is rooted into voluntarism. So we have, in this first unit only, we have tried to establish the linkages. This is the pure form of understanding of voluntarism, and when linking to society, we have discussed this part. As we proceed further, then we come to the next element comes into picture is the democracy, because voluntary organizations never existed in any other kind of societies. Democracy, in this unit we have discussed how democracy in its preliminary form existed in the Greek city-states, then Roman republics. Even in India we had Janapadas, where there was about 500, 600 BC before Christ even. But those were a rudimentary form of where people could participate in the decision-making process. But those things somewhere on the way got lost. And it was only during Renaissance, in the 14th and 15th century BC, AD, that Europe discovered these principles in the Greek literature. So there was a lot of enthusiasm to study Greek literature, Greek language, arts, and from there, the European societies try to bring this into literature, philosophy, and their own translations from Greek to English and other languages. And in this renaissance and revivalism of this whole, these ideas, lost ideas of democracy, started taking root, and then there emerged the struggle between aristocracy, king, church on one hand, and commercial classes. This long-drawn struggle gave birth to democracy, and the 18th and 19th century, the institutions of democracy started taking root, and the particular culmination of democracy particularly has occurred into the 20th century only, in most of the democratic countries. So this democracy is the second aspect. When we from philosophy, philosophical tenets of voluntarism, we come next step. First is it linkages with the theoretically only, philosophically, that's been the social theories of Parsons and Weber. But on the ground, when in society we come to the types of states or the types of societal organizations which existed in history, then it's only the democracy when it comes into picture. This has given the scope for the growth of voluntary action in rural development, or sorry, not in rural development, in general in society. I mean, no doubt our topic is particularly to rural development, but the voluntary action, for voluntary action, for voluntarism, or voluntary organizations or non-governmental organizations, which you may call, and there's no doubt theoretical differences between voluntary organization and NGOs, which we have explained also in our course material. So this being the very condition of democracy is must. Only in democracy there emerges the because over a period, as the struggle for rights emerged, gradually, in effect, the whole which the document, which you can say in particularly here Great Britain or the England comes into prominently into picture, where it's a centuries it took centuries, many centuries from 1200 AD or 1300 AD onwards. That struggle in rudimentary form started between the king and the aristocracy to begin with. Then king, aristocracy and commercial classes came into picture, and then the church and the aristocracy. This whole kind of struggle took centuries, and it got documented into a into a kind of agreements which in the form of, which emerged in the form of a document, emerged in the form of, which is called Magna Carta. If you see, Magna Carta is basically the backbone of Western democracy, where a lot of after that comes the Bill of Rights, English Bill of Rights, then US Bill of Rights, and then later on other democratic constitutions came into picture, including the Constitution of India, which is one of the most evolved constitution, which it has borrowed from various other democratic countries. So coming around this track, from philosophical, theoretical ideas to the society, when we come into society, then democratic conditions are more conducive. So this is particular aspect we have discussed in the second unit of this course. That then we talk about democratic society. Of course, we also, along with it comes the notion of state, modern state. The third unit, very third unit, discusses the relationship of state, voluntary organizations, and development. What are the fundamentals? How, at one side, in a democratic society, what's the role of state and the responsibility of the state to develop, to work for the development of the people. In a country like India, where large population is living in rural areas, that's why rural development predominantly comes into picture, and it's the responsibility and the obligation of the Indian state that these rural areas are developed. Indian state had been making and remains committed to development, to develop those rural areas. No doubt there might be any kind of shortcomings, but from that commitment it cannot run away from that commitment. That's a compulsion of it. Now how, when state has other responsibilities also, so how this balance is being struck, and what are the what are the relationship with a modern democratic state with the with development, and how it has over a period seen and visualized voluntary organizations, and later on we have discussed how the very notions of welfareism, this all relationship no doubt grew to begin with in the Western countries. Particularly we have discussed in the context of Great Britain, and then we have tried to explain how particularly the state's relationship with the voluntary organizations has grown up, has emerged, and particularly in the Indian context, how state ultimately, as we proceed toward 2000 and the 21st century, now we are 2008, that in fact by the end of the last century and beginning of this century, Indian state and the relationship between Indian state and voluntary organizations has converged to a greater extent, and they both are now working as partners in most of the development efforts and seeking support from each other. State is most willing to funding through routing funds for development through voluntary sector, NGOs. The last and vast number of voluntary organizations have emerged in working in rural areas. Here a word of caution: let's not be cynical. There might be number of voluntary organizations which might be fake, which might not be doing good work, which might be simply in the process of minting money or extracting, say, state resources. But this is no reason to be pessimistic about it, the whole process, because there are vast majority of voluntary organizations, NGOs, which have done commendable work, which have forced the state to change its perceptions about development, which has brought innovation and innovative experiences in rural development, which were beyond the imagination of the Indian state, where there are dedicated people. There are dedicated people who have devoted their life to in rural areas and have created significant institutional infrastructure in rural areas, and they have become in fact a very strong you can say examples of inspiration for the other people to follow. And this sort of so not saying there might many times the criticisms are there that their voluntary sector, large number of funds are being siphoned off just and go wastage. But if you compare it with the states' earlier efforts, and there are large number of funds which were being soaked by the bureaucracy only, or down the line through through other people who had their vested interests. And so if you compare to that, voluntary sector has done a marvelous and commendable job. And above all, it comes it springs from within the people, and people's initiative. If some people are not doing good work, they are always questioned, and new forms of organization, new forms of associations, there is always scope to emerge. But we are at this juncture where state and voluntary sector has converged and joined hands substantially to attend to the development needs of the rural areas. There are also large number of international institutions, international NGOs, which are also doing a very sincere kind of job, which are basically many times very, if you think it very far radically, they are questioned. In the beginning it was assumed as if even there is a literature suggests that they used to be considered them as agents of Western capitalism or whatsoever, various kind of connotations were attached to them. But if we leave those sort of ideological, strict, extremes, there are a large number of international voluntary organizations, NGOs, which through various channels have been really genuinely concerned for the development of third world people in the third world countries, attending to their needs, creating various kind of facilities for the people, giving them guidance, or and doing their transcending their know-how. And this whole linkages are now there, because as the globalization is coming up, in fact in the last chapter, in the last unit, fourth block, if you could see this unit on global voluntary effort and rural development, you will come across the very importance of this international NGOs over there. But this kind of earlier notions that capitalism had been purely an exploitative system has gone through a very radical change, because if the radical ideologies brought revolutions all over, in many countries all over the world, simultaneously capitalism learned its hard lessons also to reform itself. Capitalism has reformed and has now content with sharing its profit also with the people, for the benefit of people, adapting social responsibility. That compulsions of democracy has gradually reformed capitalism also. Capitalism is not that sort of a crude, brute force which is oppressive, exploitative, or just sucking the blood of the people. That sort of notions have evaporated. As globalization is taking place, more and more genuine human rights concerns, or people's rights concerns, or health concerns, people's well-being, concern of people's well-being, all democratic ideas, environmental concerns, many types of such areas are emerging, where all have realized that this collective survival all over the globe, where each and every person has, or countries have to join hands to solve all these problems. So the capitalism has learned its hard lessons particularly after the Russian Revolution, and that and that experience also, and then failures of that, you can say, of the Soviet experience, and all over the world it has, through that period when that was going on simultaneously, it has also learned its lesson, it has reformed. And basically it's not my views that I'm endorsing it for certain kind of thing or that, but literature is now enough. Research has shown that capitalism is not that capitalism, it's the most now reformed capitalism, which has tried to attune itself to the democratic needs of the people, and has tried to strengthen the democracies all over the world, and is willing to contribute for the development and benefit of the people, and remains as a as you see, that even impersonalization of capital has occurred, and even middle classes have started entering. All in the Western countries, particularly India, is also witnessing this phenomena into sharing the fruits of all this kind of commercial activities or industrial communities by putting their money into involved in it. In fact, in the whole which was earlier called monopoly capitalism, it has now turned out to be impersonal kind of capital, where people, you don't know who is the owner or not even owner. In large number of cases, that capital itself is a momentum. It's kind of institution working where it's generating, but certainly it has become sensitive to the needs of the people, to the democratic needs of societies, and thereby it has reformed to a greater extent. So here we have discussed the role of the state, voluntary organization and development, and in the fourth lecture we have discussed with the fourth unit of this first block, we have discussed philosophy and nature of non-profit organizations. What is the philosophy? How non-profit, the very pursuit of non-profit emerged? Because that pure economic interest, the pure economic interest which was earlier, and the fundamental tenet of profit, pure profit, was the concern of the capital, that has to counterpose to that emerged a non-profit interest, where people came together and started competing in businesses, in setting up industries or producing goods and collectively producing goods, but earning no profit. This situation is like this. A state sometimes will be willing to do certain thing for the people, but it may lack resources or funds. It may not be able to do it. Now, capital, on the other hand, historically was much remained to begin with, I underline it, not now, to remain mostly, even still, you can say it remains mostly particularly interested in its own profit. So, there are certain kind of areas like in sick and the poor and the destitute, who will attend to them. These were the neglected areas where neither capital interests nor the state interests were willing to put their hand or spend their money or attend to those needs. So from within the society, people made associations, organizations, non-profit organizations, where they will produce certain kind of goods or make certain kind of charity houses, attend to the sick or the poor and the destitution or the most marginalized people, and will not seek any profit out of it. Simply they will work for it. No doubt, it will work like an organization. People working over, professional working over there, are also paid certain kind of later on, you can say in salaries and all that. Now this is another contradiction. No doubt, theoretically, anybody working for a voluntary organization or an NGO must not be a paid worker. That's a pure theoretical position. But once as a came to this world organization, once organization comes into picture, structure comes into picture, you need professional, you need even office staff, you need office building, you need a whole kind of infrastructure what any other organization, business organization or any other organization requires. So certain kind of organizational requirements like salaries or like giving employees some kind of support, financial support, that comes into picture. So leaving aside that, but there's no only priority is not to earn profit. That's why non-profit. Non-profit doesn't mean that everything is just for free. No doubt, it may be marginalized cost, very small cost, but to the destitute, to the sick, to the poor, to the marginalized, working in their service. The notion is a whole notion underlying is to work in the service of the people. But certainly they need to generate certain kind of money where they have to run the organization, and with no profit, no loss basis such organizations are run. So we are in this unit we have discussed philosophy and nature of non-profit organizations. When we come to the next aspect, where then we have tried to explain organization and structure of voluntary organization. At the very word I was saying, when an organization comes into picture, what type of structure it takes place, and what in a voluntary organizations. This is the first unit of the second block. I started with the it's explaining the whole spectrum of from an idea, philosophical idea, linking it with the social action like voluntary action. Then I come to that and these areas relating with the democracy, state, and then how the principles of non-profit are involved. Then comes into the organization. When organization requirements come into picture, how voluntary agency administration must be different from any other kind of administrative setup. What can be its fundamental differences? Be like a business organization also has a administration. Even government has its own bureaucracy. From bureaucracy, from administration of a business organization, how voluntary agency must have certain kind of special tasks and special needs, and personal working over there in the voluntary sector, or what kind of what kind of qualifications, or what kind of knowledge, what kind of potential they should have, and what kind of requirements it poses. That we have discussed in the first unit of the second block. And next to that also we come to voluntary agency administration and management. In the beginning, in fact, first unit tells about when the organization comes into picture, what type of structure is required. Then we discuss what kind of voluntary agency administration special requirements are there. And next we move on to issues and agenda for social transformation. What are the in the present context voluntary organizations and NGOs are attending to which kind of issues, which issues are important, and what kind of social transformation they are seeking through their efforts. Because I said, on the one hand, there is a Indian state's long history of 60 years in the process of land development. And on the other hand, this sector has gradually grown, which now has converged and almost doing like work at an equal footing, rather more than that, even the state, where state is most willing also to its resources through voluntary sector. So what kind of issues voluntary sector is presently engaged in, and what are the priority issues, and what kind of social transformation is envisaging. And that is the top subject areas covered in this unit, which is unit 3 of block 2. And then another aspect, very important aspect, is the finance. After all, without money, things don't work. Whether it's money coming from state, whether it's money coming from industry, whether it's money generated by people's own contribution, if you have a small cause, small problem, immediate problem, people can come together, pool their own resources, solve the problem, and can disperse. They can identify after some time, 6 months, 1 year, another problem. Any other set of people can come together, pool their resources, labor or money, time, devote their time, free time, and can solve the problem and disperse. But say if you are engaged in a development work which is of continuous nature and which can produce result over a long period, you need an organization. You need an organizational structure. You need an administration. Certainly, along with that, you need vision, also developmental vision, and what type of transformation you seek, what type of issues you are attending. So along with that also emerges the financial requirement. So how voluntary organizations, NGOs, mobilize resources, mobilize funds, because after all, if you leave aside the non-profit organizations which are directly engaged in the some kind of production venture or certain kind of commercial activities, then other voluntary organizations do not have any kind of capital assets or any kind of let's say resources which can generate finances. So they depend from where the money comes. The substantial part of financial support comes from state in democratic society. Because why from state? If you can ask this question, because in my modern welfare state, in a liberal democracy, is committed to the development of the people, whether they are living in urban areas or rural areas and all that, in anywhere. So in that sense, they are committed for development. They certainly earmark certain kind of funds for development and make a planned efforts, like Indian state had been making planned efforts, 5-year plans to develop the people, also including the rural people living in rural areas. So the substantial support when voluntary sector came into picture has come through the Indian state. And the other sources are voluntary organizations generate resources through industry, and from industry or from business houses, or where capital interests are there. From there they mobilize, and then there are methods how, and their whole know-how, how to go about it, how to convince the people who own money, that they can share certain part of their money with the and can do funding for the voluntary organizations. All these aspects we have discussed in finance and resource mobilization. This is the fourth unit of the second block. If we proceed further in the third block, you find that voluntary action in rural development. Then we have we have given you a critical appraisal. I mean, how historically this sector has grown, what kind of situations it faced, and at what junctures it has it was at certain stage, it was even looked down upon, it was not considered much given attention by the Indian state, but how over a period, as I told you, it has now converged. So we will come to these topics a little on the way. Maybe this session is a few minutes more only. In the next session we will come back to and keep this broader discussion around voluntary action in rural development, and so most of the now the condition which I earlier said, it most of these VOs are registered under the Society Registration Act of the 1860 or similar acts of the state government. Registration entitles them to receive grants in aid from the government. I mean, if you are registered and you have fulfilled certain conditions which we have discussed in these our course materials, and then only you are entitled for receiving funds from the state, which is called grants in aid, and which is mostly you should society should be registered for the last 3 years, and so there are other conditions which should be fulfilled, and there are various acts of the state governments also, but provisions are there, and since substantial funds are coming from the state, and these sort of mechanisms are in place, and that has also given impetus for the growth of the voluntary sector. In fact, the importance of this area lies, this is a sort of a very thermometer where you can measure if there are large number of voluntary organizations existing in a society. It can only happen in a democracy. That shows the a picture of a democratic society, a society which is curbing the people's freedom, which is authoritarian, which is despotic, or which you can say dictatorial. People's initiatives are scuttled, and people's initiatives are are not. There's no scope for taking where people's initiatives can grow, take birth or grow, and that shows the society is not democratic, is undemocratic. That only in democratic societies such kind of provisions have emerged, and it is a long history, and we have discussed all these aspects threadbare in our course materials. We will come back to you in the next session. I think this session is going to end because we will be reverting back you to after 15 minutes or so, and we'll continue with the discussion. Thank you.
A man is standing by the side of the railway line. When the train comes towards him, the the apparent pitch of the whistle of the engine increases. When the train moves away from him, the apparent pitch of the whistle decreases. This apparent change in the pitch due to the relative motion between the source and the observer is called Doppler effect. This phenomena was first described by the Austrian physicist Christian Johann Doppler in 1842.